What's up everybody? So in today's video, we're gonna go over 5 things that you should not be doing in your manual transmission vehicle to prolong this transmission for as long as possible. So with that said, number 1 on the list has to do with when you're at a stop on a hill. So I'm on a hill right now going up. If I come to a stop, one thing you should not do is just feather the clutch to keep yourself from moving. It is really annoying to see. As you can see, I'm rolling back, using the clutch, letting it out to keep myself kind of in place. What you're doing, using your clutch, rolling up and back, is basically just causing excessive wear on your clutch pedal. Now, believe it or not, your brakes in your car are actually designed to hold your car from moving. Take my foot off the brake, and we start rolling backwards. But when you're at a standstill on a hill, stop rolling back and forth. It is just stupid looking. I remember 12 years ago when I was a 16-year-old in my first manual, I thought I was so cool rolling back and forth because everyone around me probably thought I was cool because I drove a stick shift. Nobody cares. Nobody even knows what a stick shift is these days. You're just kind of wearing out your clutch by constantly feathering the clutch. You're opening and closing the spring. The throwout bearing is putting pressure on the spring to open it, and you're slipping the clutch plates themselves. So there's just no point to it. Take your foot, put it on the brake, hold yourself, and when it's time to go, proceed and accelerate. Rolling up and back and forth is just kind of stupid looking, so don't do that. So then number 2 on the list, when you come up to a stop in your manual transmission car, once again, just come down with your brakes, come to a complete stop, leave the car in neutral, take your foot off the clutch, and sit there like that when you're at a long traffic stop. Now, of course, keep an eye on your surroundings, make sure nothing's happening in front, keep an eye on your rear view mirror, make sure no one's about to rear end you. If you see something about to happen, of course, get yourself ready to make some sort of maneuver. But in general, especially in America, when our stoplights will be 5 to 10 minutes long, you got cars in front of you, cars all behind you in line, no one's moving, just sit there in neutral. If you're sitting there with your clutch down and in gear, what you're doing is not only kind of wearing out your leg by holding the clutch down for 5 to 10 minutes, but again, you're expanding the springs, just kind of putting excessive wear on it, and there's just no logical reason, especially when there's just a lot of cars around you and nobody's moving. Just keep it in neutral, take your foot, keep it on the brake, take your foot off the clutch, and just sit there in neutral. It is so much easier. Now, of course, when you come up to a stop sign real quick, stop, take a look, and then go. Don't worry about putting it in neutral. There's no sense to doing that. But in general, when you're at a stop, just leave it in neutral. It is a lot more simple. So for number 3 on the list has to do with putting your hand on the shifter and your foot on the clutch pedal. This is not an armrest, and the clutch pedal is actually not a footrest either. It is really easy actually to pop this out of gear if you're using this as a handrest, putting too much pressure on it. I mean, not to say normal driving like this is gonna kill it, but if I somehow did something, like right there, I just accidentally popped it into neutral, it can totally happen. And what you're doing, if you're actually putting your hand on it, putting any sort of pressure, like you probably just heard that little grind, even with my clutch pressed, what you're doing is kind of putting some pressure on these synchros to where it's not quite fully engaged, and if you're putting just a little bit of pressure on it, it can easily pop out, especially when your foot is not on the clutch pedal. So don't really get in the habit of that. If you end up putting your hand on the shifter just to rest it, make sure it's just kind of lightweight, and honestly just rest it on the shift boot like this. That's a little bit safer, because if I was in 4th gear cruising and I had my hand here and something happened where I pushed it forward, like right there, once again, we popped it out of gear without having the clutch pressed. Not the best thing to do. Same thing if you look at your clutch pedal. If you're putting your foot on it as a footrest and pressing it down just a little bit, you're gonna once again be pressing the clutch and actually putting some pressure on the springs and the components in the clutch pack, and actually sometimes you could be expanding the clutch and slipping it if you're putting enough pressure on. So just don't get in the habit of that. Most cars are gonna have a dead pedal. Just put your foot there, rest your hand maybe on a different spot other than the shifter knob itself, and that's just a better way to go. That way you don't accidentally pop this into neutral, don't put any strain on the synchros, and don't put any stress on the clutch itself. So number 4 on the list has to do with when you are downshifting in your manual transmission, get in the habit of doing some sort of rev match. A lot of people, especially if they're novice drivers, they will rev match, or they won't rev match actually, and it'll be a jerky downshift. So I'm going in 4th gear. If I put in 3rd and take my foot off the clutch like that, you probably saw just a slight jerk. I could feel it a lot in my body, just wasn't that comfortable. What you want to do, so I'm in 3rd gear right now going at 2,000 RPM. If I want to go to 2nd gear, the engine is going to have to spin at a faster rate to where it's an even transition. So at 30 miles an hour, a little over 2,000 RPM, I probably want to be around 2,700 RPM to go and do second gear. So I'm going to push my foot on the clutch, put it into second, and give it a little bit of gas, and take my foot off the clutch. And now we're at about 3,000 RPM, and it was perfectly smooth. That is the way you want to do it for a nice, comfortable downshift. So once again, fourth gear now, going into third. Perfectly smooth because I gave it just a little bit of gas every time I downshifted. Get in the habit of doing that, because if you don't and you just put it in the down gear and dump the clutch like that, you're putting a lot of strain on the clutches and they're having to slip a lot, which is going to excessively wear them out. But if you rev match it, there is no extra strain on the clutches. They re-engage perfectly smooth, and it also makes you just a better driver. Now, some cars have a rev matching technology by pressing a button, but it's nice to know how to do that in a manual setting just to make sure you are a better driver. Rev matching is pretty fun to do. You don't need to do it excessively. You can also just slowly let out the clutch if you don't feel like rev matching or something. But quite honestly, get in the habit of doing it. It is a lot more fun. And when you're doing performance driving, it just makes you a better driver. Perfect downshift by rev matching. And that's how you drive these cars. Learn how to drive them. It just makes you a better driver. So then number 5 on the list now has to do with what do you do when you come to a park. So the best way to park a manual transmission is to stop the car using your foot brake, rip the e-brake, and then go ahead and shut the car off, push the clutch in, put it into gear, and that is how you're going to park your car. That way, all the weight of this car is actually sitting on this handbrake. However, we're in gear just in case somehow this parking brake fails. Now you may think a 3,500 pound car could not roll away easily. You can easily push a car like this, especially if you happen to have this into neutral. If this parking brake fails for whatever reason, it is really easy to push. As you can see, I am rolling right now that nothing is holding this down, but you can obviously hold it nicely with the parking brake. So if you end up parking your car into neutral and the parking brake fails, the car can easily roll away, run into someone else's car, or even run into a person, which you obviously don't want. Just make sure you get in the habit. First come to a stop with your foot brake, then pull the e-brake all the way up, and then go ahead and put it into gear so the car is not sitting on the transmission. Now, if you were to do it a different way, to where you put your foot on the brakes, come to a stop, put it into gear, and then take your foot off the brake, now the car is actually sitting on the transmission, and it's a little bit harder to get out of gear. You don't want the car's weight on the transmission. Now, in case you thought that was reckless, this is pretty flat ground and it does go up at a little bit angle, so we're good, but just always make sure you got it in gear, have that parking brake on. So those are 5 things you should not do in your manual transmission car. These cars are really fun to drive, a heck of a lot of fun for sure, but you want it, of course, to last as long as possible. So if you do those tips, that will prolong the life of your manual car. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, stay tuned for plenty more content, and I'll see you all in the next video.